welcome to the Heartification podcast, where I interview people on how art has affected their lives and what it means to them. Art has a very special place in my life. It not only makes me feel happy, but it allows me to make others feel special. This podcast is all about how art has made an impact on others' lives, for all ages, all backgrounds, and all walks of life. You can find more about this podcast guest in my show notes. Without further ado, let's welcome my next guest. She is an artist and the founder of Bunee. Please welcome my next guest, Diana Joleen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on my podcast. So the first question I always ask is, how do you define art?
I'm not technically trained, and so I don't really see formalities to it. I define art in everything that I do. Like, I don't know, as a creative yourself, I'm sure you can relate that if you see like a wet leaf on a ground, you see the art in it. You see like rain coming down a window. There's something about it that's beautiful but artistic. So for me, I see art in everything. So there's no clear definition. It's just how I see and perceive my world.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you. Like, my definition is any way you're able to express yourself, and that is done everywhere, and especially in nature. It's, you know, if you actually pay attention, it's so beautiful, and there's art all around us every day, everywhere.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And what art forms are you exposed to?
I mean, as a child, I wasn't really exposed to any art, to be honest with you. It's not like I was had the privilege of going to museums or being around any great works. It wasn't until later on that I saw certain things. But for me, I was exposed to, I would say, the most traditional sense in the masters, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, like what you would see in the movies or TV, or even in a magazine back in the day when magazines were a big deal. So that's what I was exposed to, but it was very minimal to my exposure to art growing up.
Yeah, that's awesome. And after your car accident, how important was art in your recovery?
Initially, I didn't even remember my art. It wasn't even like, it didn't even come to the forefront. I don't know why. And it wasn't for about 3-4 years after my accident that it hit me like, oh my gosh, my art. And I sort of wanted to like smack myself for not thinking of it sooner. But at that point in time onwards, it was instrumental for me because it was therapy. It was an outlet. It was me finding myself again. So for me, it was critical from that point onwards, but unfortunately it didn't come right away after the accident.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, art can, like, as you said, can be like a therapy, and, you know, people use it to express their feelings, and, you know, little kids write in their diaries and, you know, they lock it up, but in there is all their feelings and their expression, which is an art.
I couldn't agree more. I think when you say diaries, I remember having a diary as a kid, writing out my thoughts and feelings, but I'd also doodle, and I would also just do whatever I felt that I could do freely there without judgment. And then I would lock it up and hide it and put it away. So, but it is true. I agree with that.
Yeah. And what is the inspiration behind creating the Bunee?
There wasn't one. It literally came to me as a dream, and I tend to forget things when I wake up. So I just drew it on my iPad in the middle of the night. And the next morning I felt compelled to bring it to life. So I painted it, and for whatever reason, wrote its name out the way I did. And for whatever reason, when somebody said, "Oh, Bunee," I'm like, no, it's Bunee. It's not, you know, it's it sounds like over the top. I just don't know why. I followed my gut instinct to what I felt it should look like, or be called, or be remembered as. But there was no inspiration. It just literally came to me one night, like this really simple image of this bunny, and then the rest is history. It was just, you know, making it come from a dream to reality.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that. And you created a painting called Rain by simply allowing drops of paint to fall on a canvas. So, what inspired you to do this technique?
I was, maybe you can relate again. I see your beautiful paintings in your background. When we set out to do a canvas, it's like controlled. It's going to look like this in the end. And there's an outcome intended. With Rain, I finally had a space to where I could kind of throw paint around and not worry about my surrounding areas. Because for a long time, I was working out of my living room. And when I finally had this raw space where I didn't have to worry about anything, I just wanted to throw paint. Like, I just, like, no more control, no more thinking it through, no more sketching or like, just let's see what happens. Um, and paint is expensive. So in my mind, I wasn't going to like toss the whole thing. And that came later, throwing a cup. But I thought, let me just see what happens. So I literally started doing this hand gesture, dipping it in, and it felt great. It was like, again, this other release. It was another form of artistic therapy. There was no control in the outcome. I could pick the colors that I wanted to use, but I don't know how they're going to land. I didn't know how they were going to interact with each other. And I was just going crazy on the canvas. And all I could hear is this, like, the weight of the paint hitting the canvas. It's quite heavy. And it sounded like rain. And I started to get more ambitious to make that loud noise. So I was like throwing more paint, like going faster and harder. And instead of like dabbing off the stick or the paintbrush, I would just keep it gupped on and like just make that loud rain noise. And it just, the sound was so, I don't want to say therapeutic. It was just fulfilling. It was so fulfilling to have this sound that I resonated so much with. And then as well as it being visually stimulating. So it became this new passion of mine, and almost like an addiction to, like, yes, I get to do another rain piece. So as I was creating and I heard the rain, it only made sense from that point onwards to call it Rain.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And even I interviewed this artist from Toronto. His name is Carlos Delgado. And there was like a time he sells his paintings for like $10,000. And there was a time where he wasn't like selling anything and wasn't making any money, and he was so frustrated. So he started, doing what you did. He started like flicking and like just throwing paint at a canvas, and then he like just goes away, and the next day he comes back and he like kind of connects the different lines and dots, and it creates like a face or like a body of a human. So
Mm-hmm.
he kind of just takes more paint and connects those dots, and now that's his style. He paints like these kind of abstract faces of people and bodies. And
Beautiful.
but his first painting was because he was able to let out his emotions and got all of his
Yeah.
anger out.
I think like everybody should have that experience. I know not everyone has the space or has the paint or the materials to do it, but I can't emphasize how good it feels to do it, and that there is no who cares what it looks like in the end. Like, I genuinely do it and walk away from it and return the next day, and I look and I'm like, okay, that's how this one turned out. Great. No expectations, no pressure, just the freedom of creation, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. And how old were you when you started doing art?
I remember it as far back as I can in my memory bank, like as a child, always like seeing shapes or doodling or, my earliest memory, I always tell everyone, is like trying to find these white rocks so I can like draw on a dark rock, because we didn't have chalk. There was a time that my family lived in Saudi Arabia, and lots of sand there, but I would always draw on the sand. I didn't have access to art materials, paint, sculpting materials, or anything like that until like high school. But up until that point, I would always find a way to create pencil, paper, sketch, doodle, whatever it was. So my whole life, I've been creating.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And back to our point where art is in nature, you use things from nature to create art as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and I've seen these videos on TikTok where people, instead of using like watercolors from the store, they'll go out in nature and get like flower petals and then they'll crush it up and use the color from that to paint in their sketchbook or whatever, which is really cool because they're using, these different leaves and flowers and bark and whatever, and like pure color from nature to create these beautiful paintings.
Which is what that people used to do, right? Before we had artificial paints, they would look for inks from mushrooms or anything to create dyes and to be able to express themselves. So I think that that's amazing that at your age, you're able to recognize how people can go out and create even without the use of paints or brushes or anything like that, just for the ability to create.
Yeah, exactly. And how was the type of art you did when you were a child influential in the art you do now?
I want to say it is, but it isn't. I just think that as a kid, I didn't really know what I was wanting to do. I just wanted to um, try to create a face and try to do realism, because the first thing that we gravitate towards is trying to draw an animal or a person. Later on, I started to try to draw fashion, and like with my sister who aspired to be a fashion designer. So we'd create, these outfits and so forth. But for me, it wasn't. It didn't inspire to where I am now. It just continued. Um, it just continued to be a friendly thing in my life. I don't know how to explain it. It's like this go-to. It's very fond. It's very positive. It's an outlet that I've always had my whole life. So for me, art has my whole life inspired me to just continue to create, continue to explore, and continue to like free myself of it, because we're so restricted. We have to go to work, we have to go to school, we have to do things a certain way. Whereas art, I always say to my kids, there's no rules. There's no rules to art. So for me, it's as long as I have the freedom to create, um, that's how art has inspired me my whole life, but it hasn't really inspired anything in the sense of the genres or what I do now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And one piece of advice you give to other artists is don't look to your left, don't look to your right, just look ahead. So why is this so important in seeing the beauty of their own artistic creations?
Back in when I was younger, the only time that we would see art is if we went to a museum or if we were at the library and we'd open up a book. Now you have everything in your palm of your hand on your phone or tablet. And our world is so oversaturated with images. While it can be inspiring, or you can, come up with an idea by looking at somebody else's work, I find that it's more distracting. And I also find that it can be intimidating. So for me, being a self-taught artist, I didn't want to go anywhere and like Google who who were popular trending artists now. What is the mainstream form of art? I wanted to just follow my instincts, my intuition, my core, and just create without pressure. And I feel that by looking to your left or your right, it's like sometimes you're putting pressure on yourself without intending to. Like, the stigmas of social media. I have 4 kids, and whether it's expectations or trying to show that you're living a certain lifestyle or what you're exposed to, and just sharing that, it's like almost an oversharing. So when you look to your left or right, you're almost clouding your judgment and your instinct and your intuition to what you truly want to do. Because if what's trending is something that you wouldn't naturally gravitate towards, it's going to cloud your creative judgment. So I always say, great for everybody that's succeeding all around me. I'm so happy for them, but I don't really delve into anything online, because I just want to be true to myself. And what's ironic is, even if I create a new series, like for example, I have a doodle series called Say Joleen. Somebody had recently sent me another artist that does something similar, and I thought, oh, how interesting. But I didn't know that person existed, because when I created my doodle series, I was just following the anxiety of the day and wanting to just let it out on canvas, and no rules, no restrictions. So I find that it allows me to be 100% original and without really putting any unnecessary pressures.
Yeah, I love that. And for artists, when they, look to their left or right, they're comparing their art and what they want to create to the art of others and what other artists are creating. But they should really, just focus on what they want to create and what they want to do and what they want to sell, and like their own expression without, looking at what everyone else is doing and just following that. And, I
Yeah.
think people look for things that are unique in, every aspect of life. In business, they look for a unique business that's different from all the other businesses that are the same, because they look for that unique aspect that's different.
I couldn't agree more. If like going down the business genre, if you're trying to come up with a new business idea and you're going online, you're only going to see what's existing. And successful businesses are the ones that come up with a solution to something that somebody hasn't created yet. So it's great for inspiration if you aspire to achieve certain level of success to whatever your definition of success is. But for creating and creative intuition, I think it's just great to sort of like not obscure your visuals and just follow what's in your mind and heart.
Yeah, I totally
Yeah.
agree. And if you were to pick up a paintbrush and you had to paint what your life looks right now, what would you paint and what colors would you use?
So it's a great question. And I read it and I thought about it and I really didn't come up with like a clear answer because initially I wanted to say my canvas would be black and I would paint with white because I feel that that's what I tend to gravitate towards and being able to create lightness out of anything negative. But at the same time, my creative brain went into like, if I could create anything that reflected what my life is now, it would be a white canvas. And honestly, I would use every color that I could and I would throw it on that canvas because I want my life to be that. I want it to be colorful. I want it to be uninhibited without regulations. And if it's dark colors, that's fine because life has things that we deal with. If it's bright colors, it's fine because that's what we embrace. So for me, it would be everything, not one set thing.
That's awesome. I love that. And art can be therapeutic and it can help people through difficult times. So,
Yeah.
has art ever helped you through a difficult situation?
My whole life, I went to art as a familiar friend. My dad, we traveled quite a bit and moved quite a bit because of his job. So I was always left without friends. And whenever I'd go to a new school, I would always just have my familiar friend of, my sketchbook and pencil and just revert to that. And it was always comforting. I didn't feel a sadness or sorry for myself or anything along those lines. It was just a comforting thing. At the time, I didn't realize it was like a form of therapy because it was just something that I've always done my whole life. But I definitely agree that art can be very therapeutic, even to people who don't draw or haven't drawn. And I know that they're conducting studies now on how it can help people who've had brain injuries, concussions, depression, anxiety, how just the outlet of art therapy it is something that is tremendously beneficial. I just wish they would incorporate it more into medical treatments. But for me, my whole life, whether I realized it or not, I gravitated towards art as a form of comfort and therapy for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. And are you attracted to any particular artist?
So, like growing up, of course, my parents were old school. So they would, Michelangelo and Da Vinci, those are art. And if you can't draw like them, then you're not an artist. And then as I got older, I got exposed to more, the mainstream Picassos and Rembrandts and all that stuff. But it wasn't until later on in life that I started to paint more seriously that I learned of a Canadian artist, and her name is Rita Latondra. And she was so ahead of her time. I mean, she's in her 90s now. She no longer paints, but she was a Canadian Indigenous artist. And I think she was fantastic. Like if you look her up, there's a picture of her and she's standing next to a 20-foot painting, and she's barefoot in leather pants and just kind of like so cutting edge, so avant-garde, so ahead of her time. I just love her so much. And I read her book. It's on Amazon. I think she's phenomenal. She also did a whole bunch of murals across Toronto that you wouldn't know because you've seen them there your whole life, right? So she's fantastic. She still lives in Toronto. And then the other artist that I would like to mention is Harmon Carrera. She's like 104 years old and she still paints. And she, again, was ahead of her time, surrounded by a lot of male famous artists. And she was always overlooked because she was female. And she didn't get recognized till her 90s. And they did this documentary about her on Netflix. So I highly recommend it. It's very inspiring. But for her to be 104 years old, getting up, still painting, I'm so inspired by that. So there's the artists out there that are, the whole world knows their name and they're successful. And then there's the ones that are real, for me, inspirational. They're like heroes. So those are the two that I would definitely say I look towards.
Yeah, that's awesome. And are you attracted to any particular art form?
Not really. It's funny because I can be put in front of something that's famous and not really appreciate it. Just because it's famous doesn't mean I'm going to resonate with it. It just depends on the piece, really, whether it's sculptural or painting, how it makes me feel. And I think that's the beauty with art, is that it evokes emotion, and that's very subjective. So there's not anything I gravitate towards everything and nothing, because it's like not anything in particular, but yet I see the beauty in everything too. So
That's amazing. And my heartification project is all about giving back to the community. So how do you give back to the community?
So first, I'd like to commend you on your heartification initiative. I think it's fantastic. I read
Thank
about
you.
it. You should be very proud with the amount of money you've raised, and being a young lady who's taking your time to doing something so fabulous and giving back to the community is so inspirational. And I wish all kids were like you, because what a future it would be. For me, I was very happy when my art translated to giving back, and I first started that with the hospital that received me after my accident, and that's Trillium Health Partners. And I reached out to Credit Valley Hospital, but I also now work with, of course, Queensway. So I donate artworks to them, and they get auctioned off at their LOL gala pre-COVID, and then post-COVID was online. So I like to do small things like that. I have also worked with Bring Your Own Masks. It's a Canadian company. And I design masks for them. And again, proceeds of every mask sold goes to Trillium Health Partners. I've given works for auction and donation off to charities like Jump for Heart, which raises awareness for heart disease, as well as Maple Leafs Sports Entertainment. MLSE, Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment. I know the acronym, where they, partnered up with RBC this year. And also closest to my heart is Sick Kids. So I've partnered up with them, created limited edition merchandise where proceeds of the sales go to Sick Kids Hospital's greatest needs, but as well as their mental health youth initiative fund, which is really important because even pre-COVID, I've always found that mental health is something that touches with everybody and varying stages. And I think that if somebody who's young today is suffering with something that they can't grapple with, because as an adult who has mental health issues, I can't even imagine being somebody younger. So for me, it was very important to give back to that organization. And I continue to work with Trillium Health Partners and Sick Kids. And of course, whenever charity season comes about, they will get sculptures or paintings to be auctioned off or something good.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. And how would you like
Thanks.
people to get in touch with you?
Well, I mean, social media is the hub. So I'm mainly on Instagram, and it's art by Diana Joleen, but everything else is the exact same. Facebook, TikTok. I think that's all my stuff is all like at art by Diana Joleen. And I have a website, which is www.dianajoleen.com.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Remember, if you want to find out more about this guest, please go to my show notes where I have all the links needed. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to my podcast series and help me by sharing it, leaving a rating, and a comment. I hope you join me on my next podcast. Bye for now.